Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Hey Dr. Kyra podcast. My name is Kyra Adams, and today is the last episode for season 1, which I'm very proud of because I started a lot of things and I don't finish them. I've talked about this in other episodes where I just have too many interests, but we made it to season 1. So I'm super happy that you're still here and that you're tracking this with me. I'm very excited for what's to come next. But today, we're going to talk about something that has been a 15-year plus journey for me. I don't know if you can see the streamers in the back. They're green. And it's because I got my green card. Woo! Okay. A lot of woos in the opening today. But it has been, I think, probably the biggest running project that has been in my life outside of like personal development as a person, right? From birth to death. But it's been a big thing. And I finally got my green card, and it was kind of like anticlimactic because it just comes in the mail and it's literally just a card that's green. And you're like, wow, I have spent so much time and resources and emotions over these years, and here it is, and nobody throws you a party like Father America doesn't show up at your door and like give you a little flag or whatever. Maybe that happens when you become a citizen, right? I'm just a permanent resident now, but certainly the journey was not smooth or uneventful. So I just want to recap. If you're a foreigner / international like me, you could probably recognize some of the things and sympathize, and you can commiserate with me about how difficult the process is. And if you're not, if you are a U.S. citizen, you've never had to worry about U.S. visas, this is kind of what we go through. So I was on the F1 student visa. I would say there wasn't anything that was like a huge hindrance. I mean, the only thing is because you're on F1, like as a student, you have to like show that you could pay tuition like when you apply for the visa. So you have to print out your bank account, which I've talked about before. And you can't work unless it's like through the university. So I also talked about having a job as a student, but you can't work just like any job on the street, like a part-time job. I don't think they do it. Oh yeah, they don't do this anymore. But back then you had to carry so much paperwork. So like I think I-20, like we still carry I-20s. But we also had the I-94, which is like this little white piece of paper when you enter the US, and they like staple it to your passport. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna date myself trying to explain this. But God forbid, like the officer letting you in didn't staple it and you lost it. Like, oh man. So for an 18-year-old who could barely like navigate society in a new country, it was just like a lot of paperwork to like make sure you always have on you, because otherwise you're not getting through the border. Like they could legit send you back to your country if you don't have a certain piece of paperwork. I think one time the officer made a comment like how dirty my I-20 was because I'd been traveling with it for like 3+ years or something like that at that point, and it literally was taped multiple times. It had all these ragged edges because I was just like shoving it in my bag. And good times. F1, easy peasy, boom. I come to the end of my F1 when I'm about to graduate college. And there's this thing called OPT, optional practical training. There's another one called CPT. I didn't ever do that. But for OPT, if you are a STEM major, they can extend it. It's usually 1 year, but they can extend it to up to 3 years. And that basically gives you a chance to work in a field that was relevant to your degree. So, some students, if they could get an internship or a job right after, they'll use the OPT visa for a year or 3 years if they're eligible. And when I came to the end of the road for college, I was like, okay, I have to either get a job in the US, like using this OPT opportunity, or I have to get a job using another visa opportunity. Like there's like H-1B, which is an employment visa, but But just for a non-US person to get to that level, meaning like a company has to be motivated enough to hire you and sponsor your visa, that's just a big bar for someone who just came out of undergrad. I don't even know if they do that often for people who just graduated college. I know at a higher like level, like higher education or experience level, that's pretty common, but I don't know if that happens a lot for straight out of college kids. So I was like, it's either OPT or H-1B, or I like go back home in Korea to try to find a job. Like all of these like job search things kind of overwhelm me. And I was like, you know what? I like research enough. I could stay in school longer. So then I switched over to another F1 student visa, and that was for grad school. I only thought I was going to do a master's at first. Obviously, that extended a little bit longer than I wanted or that I originally planned. But, you know, it was another 6 years. So, wow, I've been on F1 student visa for 10 years. That's pretty significant. That was a decade of my life. Wow, so I was a student for 10 years. So then I was graduating my PhD, and I said, I had the same question, right? Okay, like, I don't think I could get a job straight away. And at that point, I was pretty sure that I wanted to stay in academia. So a postdoc was pretty straightforward. Like a lot of people do postdocs before they become faculty. And so I applied for a certain postdoctoral position, and they told me, you know, you could do the OPT. And so the OPT I had applied for and had even like received in hand. And then I had the NASA fellowship open up. Okay, here's what was really tricky for me. The NASA fellowship told me, we can't do OPT for you. You have to be on J1, which is a scholar like visa. The problem is I was very I don't want to say poor, but very low income, because I was just a grad student and I didn't have like disposable income like that. And I had like calculated how much like the OPT would cost, like, because there's application fees and all of these things that you have to pay for. And I had paid for all of that. It's several $100s, which is a lot of money for a grad student at the time. And then they told me like the NASA fellowship, which I was taking in lieu of the other one, they told me to get a J1, but for J1 you have to like leave the country and go get it from your country. I had no money to go to Korea. And you know, I mean, it ended up working out. I can't remember what I did. I might have had to like put it on my card, or I'm not sure what I did. I figured something out. But it was just like, man, this visa thing always costs me so much money. You know, like every time I apply for a visa, you have to like pay the visa fee. And so I'm really glad I'm out of the train. But anyway, so there's a financial burden that comes with these visas. So I had to pay for the flight home and then pay for the flight back on top of all of the visa, you know, fees and the paperwork, the new photo, like those things add up, things like that. But I was on the J1. One thing I didn't understand about the J1 that gave me a lot of grief later on is this thing called the 2-year residency requirement. There are multiple reasons why somebody might have that, but basically what it is if you're a J1 research scholar that's on exchange, you are going to be subject to this 2-year residency home requirement. Like you have to go home after you're done with your exchange program for 2 years, and it's mandatory. And you can get it either because you're funded by the government, or 2, you are working on something that is in a list of important topics. I was subject to it, and I didn't know that this was a thing that came attached to it. This caused massive complications for me. Usually it's not. Do not be scared. For my particular situation, it was just horrific. So I was on the J1 and I was a postdoctoral researcher. And so to give you a little bit of a background on why this 2-year residency requirement was such a difficulty for me, was that I was not a NASA postdoc per se. Like, I wasn't an employee of NASA, but I was a contractor to a company called, oh, should I even say the name of the company? I will just say Contractor A, right? So basically, NASA gives their money to Contractor A. The Contractor A pays me as a freelancer. So I didn't get a W-2, like a salaried position. I got a 1099, which is what freelancers get. So I would get the 1099. And so therefore, I'm not actually an employee of Contractor A or NASA, right? I'm just kind of operating in this fellowship program as a fellow. The problem is NASA decided halfway through my fellowship, my postdoc, that they were going to switch contractors. And so now Contractor B was administrating this fellowship program for NASA. Right in between where Contractor A and B switched over, that's when I also left the program and got kind of merged onto the JPL program. So for my third year of postdoc, instead of renewing with like the contract fellowship program, JPL actually took me on as their own postdoc. So I became a JPL affiliate. And no joke, it was within literally 2 days, I think that had happened. So like I left this company, they lost the contract that day or the day after, and then the new contractor stepped in the following day or something. So over the course of like a day or two, maybe 3, is when all of this transition happened, and I had already been like merged into the JPL system. Now, why is this so important? It's important because when you apply to be waived from this 2-year residency requirement, you have to talk to multiple people. This is what people on visas always go through. You're hit with government administrative procedures left and right, and you're trying to like get people to talk to each other that need to talk to each other so that you are exempt from something or you are granted something, right? But then they all administratively are so slow or disconnected that it's just like, and you're just one person and you have no legal training. Like you're just like oftentimes just a student, you know, like 20 something years old. You can't like every time something goes wrong, you have to like cover those like fees and costs, and it's just a mental burden. It's just more to think about. But anyway, what you need to do is you need to talk to your home government. So there are multiple ways you can get this 2-year residency requirement waived. But the most common one is the no objection statement, meaning your government doesn't object to you not coming home. And your sponsored or sponsoring organization, so in my case, the Contractor A who sponsored my visa, also has no objections, right? So I I wrote a letter to the Korean embassy, or I guess consulate general, and like there's procedures that differ by every country. And the Korean government said, well, you didn't really, receive any government funding from Korea. We're fine. Yeah, you could be exempt. Very straightforward. They sent a letter to USCIS, the waiver department. Now, the contractor company, as I go back to that story, had lost their contract with NASA, right? So this whole department that had been administrating visas for me kind of went under. And this was in the middle of COVID. And so people had already been kind of like harder to reach because, if your office phone is listed on the website, we're not in the office anymore. We're all working from home. And then this whole department went under. So I think a lot of people either got let go, or there was one particular person that had given me my J1 paperwork in the beginning. She had retired a few months after I started. And so there was just like this amorphous cloud of like people I couldn't reach. And then on top of that, Contractor A decided to move their office entirely into a new building. So their address was even completely wrong. Like whatever the immigration waiver department had for their address and was like sending letters to them like, hey, do you object to Kyra not doing this 2-year residency or not? Please say yes or no. But that letter going to contractor A was lost in the thick of COVID mail. Like nobody was receiving that mail. It was the wrong address and we don't know what happened. So it was just the hardest thing for me to get over this, because if you think about it, up to this point, I had built my life in the US for 13 years. 13 years. 13 years. That's a really long time. And I was honestly not confident that I could go back home and raise up something as big. Multiple reasons for that. One of them being all my higher education has been done in English. If you ask me, hey, how do you say granodiorite in Korean? I couldn't tell you. I really don't know. I know maybe quartz. I have the hardest time trying to explain some of these things in Korean because I don't know the professional jargon for it in Korean. So I wasn't sure if I was going to make it in the Korean environment. And then I've also never been an adult in Korea. People are like, oh, like, you know, you speak fluent Korean. And so when you go back home, like, what do you like to do? And like, you know, they ask, assuming that I'm a functional adult there. Guys, I left Korea after high school. I'm still a high schooler there. So there are very funny instances where I go to the bank and I have to do some banking thing and I don't know the word for it. So I sound like a kid trying to like communicate to these business professionals in Korea. I'd be like, I need to open like my ID. They're like, you mean you need to open an account? I'm like, yes, but it needs to move money in and out a lot. They're like, oh, you mean like a checking account? You know, like little words like that. Yes, I sound like an adult, but when it comes to like business things or being an adult, like how to file for an accident or like how to like navigate insurance or like how to do like, I've never rented or bought real estate there, so I don't know how to navigate any of that, right? I'm good as a tour guide, I will say that, but just useless as an adult there. So when I was faced with this 2-year residency requirement, like, it was really devastating. There are other nuances to the story that I really don't want to get into for the sake of time, but there were other personal things going on. And it came a point where I kind of was at a crossroads, you know, for my visa situation. I either had to figure out a way to stay here and continue to build what I was building in terms of my career, or I would have to completely abandon what I was doing and go home with no promise of figuring out how I would return back. Just speaking to the career stuff, I mean, you could be like, oh, 2 years is not that big of a deal, blah, blah, blah. There was other family stuff going on at the time. And also, I feel like if I stepped out of the career I was building here and stayed anything longer than 2 years, not doing sciences, I think it would have been really hard for me to come back. And so, yes, all things have passed and I'm here now and it's great. But at the time, it felt like this devastating thing. Also, it was COVID. So I hadn't seen my family in like 3 years or something like that. And so everything felt more, it was tough. It was tough. Not everything felt more, but it actually was tough. You might be asking, or you might be wondering, well, why didn't you pursue other types of visa options? Well, with this 2-year residency requirement, there's really no way out unless you get this exemption. You can go for other types to delay when it can hit you. I think like there's a O type visa, I think, where it's like for extraordinary talent. EB1 and 2 are kind of those things. The NIW, the national interest waiver, is one of those things. See how much visa types I know? Like, I'm telling you. Grab any of your international friends, ask them to list visa types for you. They'll keep going. Like, we can bond over that. But it eventually comes back and, in my opinion, the more you're in a career, the more critical 2 years can get. Like if I missed 2 years of undergrad and had to delay that, no biggie, all right, whatever. But if you're in the middle of this career thrust and your momentum is strong, I think 2 years could be actually pretty critical, right? Right around that time, right before I was having this difficulty getting the waiver, I had looked into the NIW option. So the NIW option is a national interest waiver where the U.S. has a national, I just said what it is, right? National interest advantage for this person to stay in the U.S. And for me as a researcher, what that means is you're doing something so critical that it is increasing domestic authority and international authority in that subject. And it's so important that the U.S. wants to have you home. There are some detailed, criteria that you have to meet. There was a case, I think, 2016. It's called the matter of Danasar. I don't know quite how to say it. I think it's 2016. But somewhere around that time, this guy sued the government and said, hey, this law should exist because you're trying to get promising individuals with a lot of potential to thrust the U.S. into this international level of excellence in their particular field. But what you're instead doing and using this visa category for is giving it out to people who are already established and really far along in their career. So not only is it unattainable for a lot of people as a visa option, but you're also doing yourself a disservice because these people are like retirement age. Also, this is not what the law was intended to be. And so this guy, I forget what major he was in, like electrical engineering or something, but it basically was arguing by field, you can't just judge off of like how many citations or papers or whatever. And he sued and he won and went all the way to Supreme Court, from what I remember. And so since then, like there's been a more quantitative criteria that you have to meet, and it's something like 5 papers, and then several conference proceedings, like abstracts that you presented. X amount of citations is kind of regarded as like, okay, that's a pretty good amount of citations to show that you're of international recognition and reputation. But I was pursuing this visa category, but it's really, again, is it more doable than becoming a superstar like, I don't know, Rihanna or something? Yeah, it's more attainable. But, in grad school, especially in, I think, my field, my particular like hydrogeology, it's not like we could churn out papers so fast because a lot of it had to do at the time for me with seasonal field work. There's only one, summer a year. So if I'm doing like interannual variability, well, there's 4 years that got invested into one of my papers. I can't churn out 5 or 6 or more in a 6-year program, right? And so by the time I was a postdoc, I was finally starting to kind of like build up my publishing career, and I could kind of go into considering this. But it's really hard. You have to prove to the U.S. why my work in hydrogeology is best kept in the U.S. and not in Korea or anywhere else, right? So you have to get recommendation letters from like all of these scholars in your field, and you have to like prove why it's so important, and you're convincing someone who does immigration for a living, not geology for a living. So long story short, I was considering this, and I know I've talked about God quite a bit on my podcast, so let me just keep running that train. But like, I even got quotes for a lawyer. I was starting to work with a lawyer. I had compiled all my materials, and I was starting to like, go on to the details of the application itself. And then I had this really strong word from God to stop and just like cease and desist immediately on this. And for me, it made 0 sense. I was like, well, my J1's about to expire because my postdoc is ending. I don't quite have a job yet. I have this, for the NIW, you still need an exemption for the 2-year requirement, but it takes a long time to figure out, and get back to you whether you get the NIW or not. So for me, it made sense for me to start, preparing this, because it could take years, like a year and a half, 2 years, however long it could take. And it didn't make sense for me. I was like, well, does this mean I'm going back to Korea after my postdoc? Like, I'm still applying to jobs, but what's happening here? Like, oh, I don't know, And so that was a leap of faith for me, honestly, pausing that. So you can imagine COVID Kyra, like, I'm all depressed from not being able to go hang out outside with my friends already. Like, we've been locked up for a couple of years at this point. And I'm just like kind of like doing my research by myself at home, and it's like really not fun. My visa starts to weigh in on me. Like, the world is kind of going crazy, and like even just my personal situation, I was like, okay, like I've been here for 13 years. Like, this is all I know for my adult life. I've pursued everything I can, including the NIW, or I've written so many letters to USCIS, like telling them like, hey, like they've moved, like contractor A is no longer in business, like for this, can you like talk to somebody else? Like, I'm writing to contractor A and trying to comb through LinkedIn to see if anybody can be of contact, and like there's all this family stuff going on. My whole like visa thing was just like crumbling in front of my eyes, and I was very like, I was taken back that God had kind of given me this word to stop, but I stopped, and I was like, you know what, I guess this is what's gonna happen, And I remember there was one time at church, after I was like figuring all this stuff out, I sat down and I was like, okay, like there's no way I don't know what to do anymore. And I was just like breaking down in front of this pastor, and I made this joke like, oh, I guess the only option left for God is like, I guess I'm getting married, because I don't see any way out. Like, I just don't. Guess what? Spoiler alert, I did get married. Like, that's how I met my husband. That's actually around the time I met my husband. Did I think about this whole visa thing, marrying my husband? Like, I mean, not really, because like even with marriage, I still had this 2-year. I'm telling you guys, the 2-year residency requirement, it never goes away. Like, even if you're married, doesn't go away. And so I told him straight up when we started dating, I was like, hey, by the way, my visa's expiring. I have this 2-year residency requirement. And so if we get married, I might have to go to Korea for 2 years. Marrying you doesn't change that, but I'm just letting you know. And he was like, okay, well, maybe I'll go get a job in Korea for 2 years. And that's when I was like, oh, this is serious. Like, okay. For the first few months of our marriage, this was a very big uncertainty for us. And it was very difficult to navigate emotionally. Like, you're newly married. I was still looking for a job because my postdoc was still kind of, it was coming to a close. I hadn't quite finished yet. My visa's expiring. At the same time, our lease was also expiring, and we had to figure out, like, are we going to stay for another year and sign another year lease? Like, what's going to happen? For over a year, this was one of the greatest uncertainties that we were trying to navigate. And then I got a job offer from JPL, which was amazing. And then they switched me over to an H-1B, which is a working visa. One of the greatest things I think that happened for me is that because JPL is managed by an academic university, they don't have a cap on H-1B. What do I mean by that? If you're a company or a corporation and you want to hire somebody that's a foreign national on this H-1B visa, you have to kind of go through this long wait list, and there's like a quota. So if the application opens, boom, let's say just for ease, like January 1st of every year, you can only hire, the US will only give out so many H-1Bs, and all the companies kind of like try to put in their application for their candidate. That's how I understand the system. But for academic institutions, they kind of bypass the whole thing, and they could grant you an H-1B visa pretty quickly. And so that was really good for me. I was able to kind of seamlessly transition from a J1 to an H-1B by staying in the Caltech system. And so at this point, it was just waiting around for this 2-year residency requirement to go away, and that I would be granted an exemption so that I could keep my new job, that I have received from JPL, stay in the US, and also just not have to deal with this 2-year thing anymore. I remember I had combed through my email so many times, and one day I found a name that was associated with the person that had given me my original J1 paperwork, the person I said retired. And I was like, let me see if she still works there. It was completely, it was a very far-fetched contact, because I had gone through all the other people that I knew actually still worked there, even up to like director level. The director didn't know what to do. But I just saw a name CC'd in an email when I was combing through again. I emailed her and I heard back, and she actually gave me her personal phone number. And she was like, you can call me here. Let's chat. I called her. I explained the whole situation. And she was like, oh, okay, I'd be happy to help you out with that. This is my home address. Like, we're all working from home. I've never received anything from USCIS, but, I could maybe, if they send it to me here, like, I could be of service. I still work there. And I was like, this is my saving grace. I wrote another letter to USCIS, and JPL had even stepped into. They were like, hey, listen, like, can you just give her the exemption? Like, her sponsor is no longer involved. Like, they didn't respond to any of that. But I wrote another letter and said, this is kind of what's happened. This is the new address you can send it to. Can you, like, please try again? I don't know what happened in that weekend. It makes zero sense. I really think this was another miracle, because I had sent that letter on Thursday and it had arrived at USCIS on Friday. But on Monday, all of a sudden, boom, 3 days later, I had an exemption granted. It makes zero sense. It literally makes zero sense. Doesn't it make zero sense? Because if the letter arrived on Friday, they only had that Friday and Monday as a working day to figure that out. But if I said, hey, can you reach out to this person? This is a new person. Here's her home address because they're working from home. Can you reach out to her to whatever? They couldn't have possibly received her answer, because it has to be paper trails. It has to be snail mail by Monday to give me the exemption. Like, it makes zero sense. I really think there was another miracle involved in here. I don't want to know how everything happened, but magically I had this waiver after like months. It was over a year of waiting. Usually they say online, like, oh, the non-residency like waiver thing, it takes like 4 to 6 months. I think it's slowed down a lot with COVID. Mine took more than 13 months. So imagine, newly married, new job, just got a new visa type, and like lease is ending, your family has stuff going on, and then 13 months of this. That was the biggest hurdle for my visa story. Even for my marriage, like, so after that had been cleared, we started to pursue getting the green card through marriage. That also has lots of miracles and lots of things involved. But I just want to bring the story back home. After all of this, I have received my green card after 15 years. How much effort I've put into this, I have no idea of quantifying, but I'm just very grateful, that it worked out for me. And if you're navigating this now, please do not lose heart. You're where you're supposed to be. And I still wonder, like, why was I born in Korea if I were going to like have my whole like career here in the US and like even get married here? I don't know how these things work, but I'm grateful to be you know, to have experienced both countries so intimately. And it's a big part of who I am now. So I still wonder why I was like placed in Korea and here, but who knows? A lot of things that are hard for visa people, you always feel excluded, right? And there's something that you can't do because you're on a particular status. For me, it was, I think, even more prominent because at JPL, like, there are things you can't do as a foreigner, like even just enter a certain building, or you know, as simple as sharing a folder with somebody. If you're a foreign national, you can't. Like, you know, there's a lot of like little like software nuances, and you know, that always remind you that you're alien, like you don't belong here. And those little things can really change how you see yourself in owning your job or owning who you are or what you do. You know, there's just bigger implications for foreign nationals. Even your behavior, right? Like one misstep and you could permanently lose your access to this country. And I think I have realized recently I have realized how much weight that was on me and my character and who I am and how I conduct myself. And I think I am now starting to understand how to shake that off. Not that like, oh, I could do whatever I want because I'm permanent resident, but just like, oh, I was always looking for the next step. And I was always worried if I didn't have something lined up. Because visa people, if you don't have something lined up right away, I mean, you're going back. You know, a lot of these things, even when the JPL layoff was happening, you know, I'm on H-1B, and if I get laid off, like I have 30 days to leave the country or find a new sponsor, find a new job. 30 days is really short, right? So it has affected how I see the future and how I prepare. It's made me incredibly prepared, but also just this paranoia of being chased by the expiration date of your visa. That's just a perpetual thing that we experience. And so I'm trying to identify where it has hit my psyche and get rid of that. And maybe breathe out a little bit now, just for a little bit. I will say, even if you have this green card through marriage, it's not permanent. You know, there's also an expiration date with that. But yeah, I finally arrived at this green stage. So with that, I'm coming back for season 2. It's a promise to myself and everyone listening. If you haven't subscribed to me yet, or if we're not connected on social media, please do so now. So you can subscribe to the Spotify podcast itself, but you can also find me on social. So Hey Dr. Kyra, or HEYDRKYRA.com. That's my website. And then Instagram is also the same handle, Hey Dr. Kyra. I also do have a YouTube channel, but if you're already here, you listen to everything kind of that's on YouTube. It's going to be reserved for more like Korean content, I think, for me. But connect with me so that you can figure out when I'm coming back for season 2. I haven't quite decided when the release date will be, but I'll definitely put up a trailer and an announcement. So connect with me before you leave this episode. Thank you all for being here today and listening to my long-winded story about visas. And I hope that you're going to have a wonderful time until we're back and we're reunited with more stories. But thank you all for listening. Bye.